Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're exploring the world of quantum psychology.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff, and we're going to be looking at a book called The Beginner's Guide to Quantum Psychology
Yeah.
by Stephen H. Wolinsky.
Babe.
Bait.
So what is quantum psychology?
Well, you know how a lot of psychology is about, like giving you tips and tricks to kind of tweak your personality.
Right.
This one's a little bit different.
Okay.
This is like going deeper. It's like
To the core?
really trying to figure out who you are at like the most fundamental level.
So like a radical shift in how we understand the self.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not about like, oh, I want to be, more outgoing or, I want to be, better at this or that.
Mm.
It's like really questioning like, who am I beyond all of those kind of superficial
Yeah.
layers?
Like peeling back the layers of the onion and getting to
Exactly.
the truth.
So where do we even begin to unpack this whole concept of the true self?
Well, quantum psychology draws a lot from quantum physics and Buddhist philosophy.
Okay.
And it sees the universe as this interconnected web.
Okay, I've heard about that,
Yeah.
like the whole interconnectedness thing.
Right.
But like, how does that relate to me, like as an individual?
Well, think about it this way. Quantum physics has shown us that what we perceive as solid matter is mostly empty space at the subatomic level,
So you're saying like even I am mostly empty space?
pretty much.
Yeah, my mind is blown right now.
It's a very kind of mind-bending concept.
Yeah.
And quantum psychology takes this idea of emptiness and applies it to our understanding of the self.
Okay.
It borrows heavily from Advaita Vedanta, a non-dual awareness approach from India.
Advaita Vedanta. I'm not familiar with that.
It's essentially a philosophy that says there's only one substance in the universe,
Okay.
and everything originates from this single source.
So in essence, like I am not separate from the universe. I am a part of this one substance.
Exactly. You're not separate. You're the universe experiencing itself.
Yeah. Okay, so if we're all connected and we come from the same source, where does this idea of a separate self even come from?
That's where the concept of the false core comes in.
Okay.
And that's a key idea in quantum psychology. And it suggests that this sense of a separate, limited self is actually a construct,
That's an illusion.
an illusion. Yeah.
Okay, so let's break down this false core idea. What is it and how does it form?
The false core forms in early childhood, often as a response to the perceived trauma of separating from our mother.
Okay.
So you can imagine a baby completely dependent on their mother
Yeah.
and then suddenly realizing they are a separate individual.
That must be a pretty jarring experience for a baby.
Yeah, that separation creates a sense of lack within us,
Okay.
a feeling that something is missing.
So we develop this false core to cope with that feeling of lack.
Precisely. The false core is essentially a set of beliefs and conclusions we draw about ourselves based on these early experiences.
Okay.
And these beliefs often revolve around, not being good enough, not being loved enough, or not being worthy.
Yeah, I think we've all felt that at some point,
Sure.
But how does this false core actually play out in our everyday lives?
So it leads to the development of what quantum psychology calls the false self.
Okay.
And you can think of this as a mask we wear, a persona we create to try and fill that void
That was created by the false core.
created by the false core. Exactly.
So the false self is like a compensation mechanism.
Mm.
It's like a way of overcompensating for those
Exactly.
deep-seated insecurities.
It drives us to seek validation, achievement, and external approval to try and prove our worth.
And it can never really find it right
It can never truly find lasting fulfillment.
because it's trying to fill a hole that doesn't actually exist.
Exactly. And the false self operates through different lenses or trances which distort how we see the world.
Okay.
These are patterns of thinking and behaving that keep us trapped in the illusion of separation and incompleteness.
It's kind of like that story of the Sufi master and his student, right?
Yeah.
Searching for God.
That's a perfect analogy.
And he's like looking everywhere for God, and God's like right there.
Exactly. He's so busy searching
Yeah.
that he misses the point entirely.
Yeah, and that's what we do with the false self.
Yes.
We're so busy trying to fix ourselves to achieve to be better that we miss the reality that like wholeness is already within us.
Powerful insight. And it points to the heart of what quantum psychology is all about.
Which is,
Dismantling the false core and disowning the false self.
so if we're not supposed to be feeding this false self,
Mhm.
how do we actually dismantle this false core?
It starts with awareness. We need to shine a light on the false core to see it for what it is, a collection of beliefs and patterns that we've adopted but that are not our true essence.
So step one is acknowledging it exists.
Exactly. Once we see it, we can start to detach from it.
Okay.
It's like taking off a pair of glasses that have been distorting our vision.
Okay.
We start to see the world and ourselves with more clarity.
And this clarity helps us to connect with our true selves.
Yes, and that's where the different dimensions of awareness come in.
Oh.
Quantum psychology outlines 6 dimensions, and understanding these dimensions is crucial for navigating our inner and outer worlds.
So we're not just dismantling the false core, but we're also expanding our awareness to include these different dimensions.
Exactly. It's a process of both deconstruction and expansion.
Okay.
We're letting go of the old limited self and opening up to a much wider, more expansive experience of who we truly are.
This is all incredibly fascinating. I can already see how understanding these concepts can be so helpful in our everyday lives. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's break down these 6 dimensions of awareness.
Absolutely.
What is the external dimension all about?
Okay. So
Is it just about being more aware of our surroundings?
it's more than just noticing things. It's about experiencing the world through our senses without adding our own interpretations or judgments.
So instead of seeing a tree and thinking, oh, that's a beautiful oak tree, I wonder how old it is,
Yeah.
I would just experience the tree, its shape, its colors, the texture of the bark, without all the mental chatter.
Exactly. And that can be a really powerful practice because it allows us to be fully present in the moment
Yeah.
without the distractions of the false core.
I can see how that could be really helpful for like reducing stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
But what about our thoughts?
Yeah.
They're a pretty big part of our experience.
Absolutely. And that's where the thinking dimension comes in.
Okay.
It encompasses all those thoughts, beliefs, memories, and that constant inner dialogue we all have.
And I'm guessing the false core has a lot of influence over this dimension.
You bet the false core is constantly shaping our perceptions and interpretations, filtering everything through its own lens of fear and lack.
So even if we're trying to think positive thoughts, the false core might be sabotaging our efforts.
This is a sneaky little devil.
Yeah.
It can whisper doubts and fears in our ear, even when we're trying our best to be optimistic. That's why quantum psychology emphasizes the importance of becoming aware of these thought patterns and recognizing when they're coming from the false core.
So it's not about suppressing our thoughts, it's about becoming more discerning about where they're coming from.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And this discernment also applies to our intuition.
Okay.
Quantum psychology highlights that a common mistake people make is confusing their internal dialogue with genuine intuition.
Ooh, that's interesting. I've definitely experienced that, like mistaking anxious thoughts for intuitive guidance.
Right.
How can we tell the difference?
So intuition often arises as a quiet knowing, a gut feeling that's not necessarily attached to any specific thoughts or reasoning.
Okay.
Internal dialogue, on the other hand, is usually more like a chatterbox
Yeah.
filled with doubts, fears, and shoulds.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's about tuning into that deeper sense of knowing, that inner wisdom that's not clouded by the false core's chatter.
Okay, so it's about like quieting the mind a little bit and really tuning into that deeper knowing.
Yes.
Okay. And that leads us to the emotional dimension, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is where we experience the full spectrum of our feelings and sensations, the joy, sadness, anger, fear, and everything in between.
And I'm guessing the false core doesn't like this dimension very much.
No, it does not.
It probably wants us to like suppress all those uncomfortable emotions.
You're right on the mark. The false core wants to keep everything neat and tidy, avoiding anything that might disrupt its carefully constructed illusion of control.
It likes to be in control.
It loves control.
But quantum psychology encourages us to do the opposite.
Yes.
It encourages us to fully experience our emotions.
Embrace them.
Without resistance
Yes.
or judgment.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that emotions are energy moving through us, and that resisting them only creates more tension and suffering.
So instead of trying to push away my anger or my sadness, I allow myself to feel it.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that emotions are energy moving through us, and that resisting them only creates more tension and suffering.
I've heard that phrase, what you resist persists.
Yes.
And that seems to apply here.
It's a perfect analogy. By allowing ourselves to feel our emotions fully, we create space for them to move through us and eventually release.
Okay.
And quantum psychology offers specific techniques for working with emotions in this way, like the quantum exercise of transmutation.
Transmutation? What's that all about?
It's about transforming energy from one state to another rather than trying to suppress or get rid of it.
Okay.
So imagine taking the energy of anger
Okay.
and channeling it into something creative or constructive.
So instead of like punching a wall, I write a poem.
Exactly, or working on a challenging project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So instead of letting our emotions control us, we learn to harness their energy and use it for our own growth.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And it's a much more empowering approach than traditional methods of emotional regulation, which often involve repression or denial.
It seems like quantum psychology is all about taking what we usually consider negative or unwanted
Hmm.
and transforming it into something positive and beneficial.
That's a great way to put it. And that leads us to the fourth dimension, which is the biological or animal dimension.
Okay, this sounds interesting. What does our animal nature have to do with quantum psychology?
It's about recognizing that we are not just minds floating around in space. We are embodied beings with physical needs, instincts, and survival mechanisms.
Hmm.
And this dimension plays a huge role in shaping our experiences.
So even our most spiritual aspirations are rooted in our biology.
Exactly. And quantum psychology acknowledges the interconnectedness of our minds and bodies.
Okay.
It introduces the concept of the biological core.
Biological core, what's that?
Think of it as the bridge between the spaciousness of our essence and our physical form.
Okay.
It's the way our essence expresses itself through our bodies.
So it's like the physical manifestation of our true selves.
You got it. But sometimes due to trauma, stress, or societal conditioning, our biological core can become misaligned.
And this misalignment can cause problems.
It can manifest as chronic pain, fatigue, anxiety, depression, or a general sense of disconnection from our bodies.
So part of the work of quantum psychology is about realigning our biological core and reconnecting with our bodies.
Absolutely. It's about honoring our physical selves and recognizing the wisdom and vitality that reside within our bodies.
I'm sensing a theme here.
Uh-huh.
A lot of letting go of old patterns and connecting with a deeper, more authentic part of ourselves.
That's a great observation, and it leads us beautifully into the fifth dimension, the essence dimension.
Okay.
This is where we tap into the spaciousness and fullness of our true being, that realm of pure consciousness that exists beyond the limitations of the false core.
This sounds like the realm of the true self we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And here's the key point. Essence is not something we need to create or achieve. It's already present within us. It's
Yeah.
like the ground of our being, the source from which everything arises.
So it's always there waiting to be discovered.
It's more than just waiting. It's the very foundation of our existence,
Okay.
the canvas upon which the painting of our lives is created.
Okay. So why are we even talking about the false core?
Well, because there's an obstacle.
Okay.
And the book calls this the ultimate trauma of splitting off from essence.
Ultimate trauma. That sounds intense. What does that even mean?
It occurs when we identify so strongly with the false core and the false self
Okay.
that we forget our true nature.
Okay.
We start believing that this constructed identity is all we are.
We lose touch.
Exactly.
Who that essence.
Yes. And that creates a separation between us and our essence, and that leads to that sense of lack and incompleteness we talked about earlier.
So we create our own suffering by believing in this illusion of separation.
That's a very powerful insight.
Wow.
And the path to healing involves dismantling that false core, recognizing the illusion, and reconnecting with our essence.
So how do we reconnect with our essence?
Quantum psychology offers specific techniques for this, but it starts with awareness.
Okay.
We need to cultivate an awareness of our essence to feel its presence within us.
So once we've reconnected with our essence, we can finally be free from the grip of the false core.
It's an ongoing process, a journey of self-discovery.
Right.
But by reconnecting with our essence, we tap into a source of wisdom, love, and power that can transform our lives.
Wow, that's incredible. And that takes us to the sixth and final dimension, the I am dimension.
Yes.
The I am dimension, that sounds mysterious and profound. What exactly is it?
So this dimension represents the pure, unconditioned awareness that's at the very core of our being. Think of it as the observer, the witness, the silent awareness that's always present, regardless of what thoughts, emotions, or sensations are arising.
It's like the eye of the storm,
Yes.
calm and still amidst all the chaos of our lives.
A beautiful analogy. The I am is not something we can grasp conceptually.
Yeah.
It's something we can only experience directly through self-inquiry, meditation, and deep introspection.
So it's more of an experiential understanding than an intellectual one.
Exactly. And quantum psychology emphasizes the importance of cultivating this direct experience of the I am as the key to true freedom and liberation.
It sounds like a journey worth taking.
It is.
So we've got these 6 dimensions of awareness.
Yeah.
And we've covered the external dimension, which
Yeah.
is all about experiencing the world through our senses without judgment.
Right. Just pure experience.
Okay, now we're on to the thinking dimension.
Yes.
What's that all about?
So this dimension encompasses all those thoughts, beliefs, memories, and that constant inner dialogue we all have going on in our heads.
So like all the mental chatter.
All the mental chatter, exactly. And as you might have guessed, the false core has a huge influence over this dimension.
Okay, so it's like our thoughts are being filtered through this lens of the false core.
Precisely. The false core is constantly shaping our perceptions and interpretations, filtering everything through its own lens of fear and lack.
So even when we're trying to be positive, the false core is kind of working against us.
Yeah, it can be really sneaky like that. It can whisper doubts and fears in our ear, even when we're trying our best to be optimistic.
It's like a little saboteur in our minds.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why quantum psychology emphasizes the importance of becoming aware of these thought patterns
Yeah.
and recognizing when they're coming from the false core.
So it's not about like, trying to stop thinking altogether.
No.
It's more about being aware
recognizing the source
of where those thoughts are coming from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this discernment, this ability to recognize the source of our thoughts also applies to our intuition.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, quantum psychology points out that a common mistake people make is confusing their internal dialogue with genuine intuition.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely fallen into that trap before.
Yeah.
Like mistaking those anxious thoughts for some kind of intuitive guidance.
Right.
So how can we tell the difference?
Well, intuition often arises as a quiet knowing, that gut feeling. That's not necessarily attached to any specific thoughts or reasoning.
Okay.
Internal dialogue, on the other hand, is usually more like a chatterbox.
Yeah.
Filled with doubts, fears, and shoulds.
Okay, so it's about quieting the mind a little bit. Yeah.
And tuning into that deeper sense of knowing.
Exactly.
Okay, so from thoughts, we move to feelings, the emotional dimension.
Yes. This is where we experience the full spectrum of our emotions.
Yeah.
The joy, sadness, anger, fear, and everything in between.
And I'm guessing the false core is not a big fan of this dimension.
The false core wants to avoid those uncomfortable emotions at all costs.
It wants to keep everything nice and tidy.
Exactly. It wants to maintain that illusion of control.
But quantum psychology encourages us to do the opposite, right?
Absolutely. It encourages us to fully embrace our emotions.
To feel them without judgment.
Exactly. Because emotions are just energy moving through us.
Okay.
And resisting them only creates more tension and suffering.
I love that phrase, what you resist persists.
It's so true.
It seems to apply here.
It does. By allowing ourselves to feel our emotions fully, we create space for them to move through us and eventually release.
And quantum psychology actually gives us tools to work with our emotions in this way, right? There are specific techniques, like the quantum exercise of transmutation.
Transmutation, that sounds kind of alchemical.
It is, in a way, it's about transforming energy from one state to another, rather than trying to suppress or get rid of it.
So instead of trying to push away my anger, I can transform it into something else.
Exactly. You could channel that energy into something creative, like writing a song or painting a picture.
So we can actually use our emotions as fuel for growth.
That's the idea. It's a much more empowering approach than just trying to suppress or deny our feelings.
It seems like quantum psychology is really all about taking what we usually consider negative and turning it into something positive.
Exactly. And that brings us to the fourth dimension, the biological or animal dimension.
Okay, this sounds interesting. What does our animal nature have to do with quantum psychology?
It's about recognizing that we're not just minds. We have bodies.
Right.
We're not just floating around in space. We're embodied beings with physical needs, instincts, and survival mechanisms. And this dimension plays a huge role in how we experience the world.
So even our spiritual aspirations are connected to our physicality.
Exactly. And quantum psychology acknowledges that interconnectedness of mind and body.
It's all connected.
It's all connected. And it introduces the concept of the biological core.
Biological core? What's that?
You can think of it as the bridge between the spaciousness of our essence and our physical form.
So like the meeting point between the spiritual and the physical.
Exactly. It's the way our essence expresses itself through our bodies.
So it's like the physical manifestation of our true selves.
Yes, exactly. But sometimes because of things like trauma or stress or even just societal conditioning, our biological core could become misaligned.
Okay, and what happens when it's misaligned?
Well, this misalignment can manifest in a lot of different ways. Things like chronic pain, fatigue, anxiety, depression, even just a general sense of disconnect from our bodies.
So it can really impact our overall well-being.
It really can.
So part of the work then in quantum psychology is about realigning our biological core and reconnecting with our bodies.
Absolutely. It's about honoring our physical selves and recognizing the wisdom and vitality that reside within our bodies.
Okay, so we've got this theme of letting go of old patterns
Yeah,
and connecting with a deeper, more authentic part of ourselves.
right.
And that leads us to the fifth dimension, the essence dimension.
Yes, this is where we tap into that spaciousness and fullness of our true being, that realm of pure consciousness that exists beyond the limitations of the false core.
This sounds like the realm of the true self that we talked about earlier.
It is, and here's the thing. Essence isn't something we have to create or achieve. It's already present within us.
It's already there.
It's always been there.
We just have to uncover it.
Exactly. It's like the ground of our being, the source from which everything arises.
Okay, so if essence is already there, why do we even need to talk about the false core and all that stuff?
Because there's an obstacle. And the book refers to this as the ultimate trauma of splitting off from essence.
Ultimate trauma, that sounds pretty heavy. What does that mean?
It occurs when we identify so strongly with the false core and the false self that we completely forget our true nature.
We get so caught up in that illusion,
We do. We start to believe that that constructed identity is all we are.
and we lose touch with that deeper essence.
Exactly. And that creates a separation between us and our essence, which leads to that sense of lack and incompleteness that we talked about earlier.
So it's like we create our own suffering by believing in this illusion of separation.
Yeah, it's a powerful insight. And the path to healing involves dismantling that false core, recognizing the illusion, and reconnecting with our essence.
So how do we reconnect with our essence?
Quantum psychology offers specific techniques,
Yeah.
but it all starts with awareness. We need to cultivate an awareness of our essence to feel its presence within us.
Okay, so once we've reconnected with our essence, can we finally be free from the grip of the false core?
It's an ongoing process. It's a journey of self-discovery.
Yeah.
But by reconnecting with our essence, we tap into this incredible source of wisdom, love, and power that can transform our lives.
That's amazing. And that leads us to the sixth and final dimension, the I am dimension.
Yes.
This sounds mysterious and profound. What exactly is the I am dimension?
So this dimension represents the pure, unconditioned awareness that's at the very core of our being. Think of it as the observer, the witness, the silent awareness that's always present, regardless of what thoughts, emotions, or sensations are arising.
It's like the eye of the storm, right?
Beautiful analogy.
Calm and peaceful amidst the chaos.
Exactly. The I am is not something we can grasp conceptually.
Okay.
It's something we can only experience directly through practices like self-inquiry, meditation, deep introspection.
So it's more of an experiential understanding than an intellectual one.
Precisely. And quantum psychology emphasizes the importance of cultivating this direct experience of
Yeah.
the I am as the key to true freedom and liberation.
Sounds like a journey worth taking. Wow, so we've explored all these dimensions of awareness from the external world to the depths of our I am.
It's quite a journey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is a lot to take in. And one of the things that really struck me is how quantum psychology emphasizes that, we're not just one of these dimensions.
Yeah.
We're all of them intertwined.
That's a key insight. It's not about picking and choosing which dimension is most important. It's about recognizing the interplay between them all.
Right, like they all work together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're like different facets of the same jewel, each reflecting a unique aspect of who we are.
And when we try to ignore or suppress certain dimensions, like let's say our emotions or our physical needs, it creates imbalance.
It does. It throws things out of whack.
Yeah, it's like trying to run a car on only two wheels, right?
Yeah, exactly. It might work for a little bit, but you're not going to get very far.
So integrating all these different dimensions is really key to living a more whole and authentic life.
It's essential. And it's not just about our own personal well-being.
Right,
Quantum psychology also talks about the interconnectedness of everything in the universe,
right.
suggesting that our individual journeys are ultimately part of a much larger cosmic dance.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Now, we talked about archetypes earlier, and I'm curious about how they fit into this whole picture.
Right.
The book connects them to dimensions in physics, which sounds kind of mind-blowing.
It is. It's a very thought-provoking idea.
Yeah.
Think about it like this. Just as gravity shapes the physical universe,
Yeah.
attracting objects and holding them in orbit,
Yeah.
certain psychological forces shape our lives, influencing our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
So these archetypes are like these universal patterns of energy
Yes.
that are influencing our experience.
Precisely. And quantum psychology suggests that these archetypes might be connected to the very fabric of reality itself.
Wow, that's a big idea.
It is.
It makes me wonder, if even our spiritual paths are somehow influenced by these archetypes.
That's a fascinating question. The book certainly suggests that these forces are at play on multiple levels,
Right.
shaping not only our individual lives, but also, the evolution of consciousness itself.
It's like we're all part of this grand cosmic play.
In a way, yes.
And the book goes even deeper, right? It talks about concepts like the void of undifferentiated consciousness,
Yeah.
the nameless absolute,
Right?
where parallel universes supposedly reside. I mean, it almost feels like we're venturing into science fiction territory here.
It does get pretty out there, but think about it this way. Imagine like a vast, empty canvas,
Hmm?
where anything is possible.
Right.
That's the nameless absolute. It's a realm of pure potential.
Okay, and what about the void?
The void is the undifferentiated consciousness that permeates the nameless absolute. It's like the source from which all things arise, the ultimate ground of being.
So quantum psychology is suggesting that our experience of, like the singular linear reality
Yeah.
is just one of many possibilities.
It's a mind-boggling concept.
It is.
But the book suggests that by, transcending the limitations of our false core and false self,
Mm-hmm.
we can actually access these other dimensions of reality.
That's a pretty radical idea.
It suggests that we can tap into a level of awareness that goes far beyond our everyday experience.
So it sounds like quantum psychology is ultimately pointing us towards a pretty profound shift in how we understand ourselves and the universe and the nature of reality itself.
It's about recognizing the infinite potential that lies within each of us.
This has been an incredibly fascinating conversation.
It has.
I've learned so much about myself and the nature of reality.
I'm glad to hear that.
And for our listeners, if you're intrigued by these ideas, I highly recommend checking out The Beginner's Guide to Quantum Psychology.
Yeah, it's a great place to start.
Dive deeper into these concepts on your own.
Absolutely. There's a whole universe waiting to be discovered within each of us.
And quantum psychology gives us the tools to start exploring that inner universe.
Exactly. It empowers us to unveil those mysteries.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of quantum psychology.
It's been my pleasure.
And for our listeners, we'll catch you on the next deep dive.